Catus Maximus, and look at this. What a saw. This is kind of an interesting tool. I figured I'd do a little video about it. It's essentially a folding bow saw, although it's intended to be, I guess, more of a kind of a do-it-all saw rather than just being specifically a bow saw, which would be used for cutting trees and limbs and that type of stuff. And the reason I bring this up is there actually are folding sheet metal bow saws. This one uses 20-inch blades, but this one is triangular, which offers an advantage and a disadvantage. It's actually pretty easy to use. All you would do is just press this button because it locks this in and protects the blade. So you just press this button, slides out, folds over. You have a little lock screw here. I think the biggest disadvantage is worrying about losing the screws. When you loosen the screw, you have a blade in here. This one is not a bimetal, even though it kind of looks like it may be a hacksaw or metal cutting blade. It's like a fine tooth blade that might be used for hardwoods. These blades, you can get a variety of different tooth styles. So you could actually use this for something such as like this PT, where you could have multiple different blades in the same tool at the same time. So anyway, this whole carriage actually, this thing is huge. I can't even get far enough back. You have to flip the blade around. Pretty simple. I do like the way it does protect the blade very well. And then you have this little cam down here. It does have a metal insert. The cam is actually pretty nicely designed because it has a little detent right at the part where it's at its maximum open, so you don't have to fiddle with it too much. You just pop the blade in, and then you flip this right around. And now what we have is this triangular frame, a U-shaped aluminum channel, and this kind of funky handle. And I think it works kind of okay. The big Achilles heel is that you just don't have much depth right here at the end. So if you need to cut off something that's pretty deep or large, you'd have to do it more on this back portion. But for that sacrifice, you actually get something that has a whole heck of a lot more, or I wouldn't say a whole heck, but definitely has significantly more rigidity than what would be a typical bow saw. And you actually kind of notice that because if you're using it, you know, you do have ability to use two hands on it just like any other bow saw. But you do notice that rigidity when you're using this saw because as soon as you, well, let me back it up. As soon as you, wow, we're doing a cross cut here. Come on now. And as I'm discovering myself, the particular disadvantage is when you have a grip and you're holding up here, when you're pushing this, you're actually, because of the angle of this upper beam, you're pressing downwards on the blade. So when you're holding up here, it's just about impossible to actually push it. Although, on the same time, if you're trying to make a very aggressive cut, you can just raise your grip up and you automatically start putting a lot more downward pressure. But with this new blade and actually pretty old dry wood, I'm having to grab way down here at the bottom. In order to reduce that downward pressure, otherwise it just bites in so hard that you can't even push the saw. I could try flipping the blade around backwards. I may have more success with a high grip on a pulling stroke rather than a pushing stroke. But one thing you do notice is this is pretty lightweight. And two, you do notice that rigidity of the frame. It really does feel like a pretty solid saw. And I think that's really the whole point to it. So anyway, kind of hard to find online, but I thought this was an interesting take on a bow saw. And the rigid frame, you really do feel it. It really feels like a pretty stiff, rigid saw, more like a oversized hacksaw frame versus the traditional tubular bow saw frame, which does have some flex and give and bend when you're using it. This thing just feels totally rigid when you're using it. It's actually pretty surprising. And the way that the grip works and the angles, because you're driving a triangle through the middle using one of the legs to cut with, is pretty interesting. It's actually normal hand position. Sometimes it won't work, but it's nice to be able to move up or down. They did make this handle pretty ergonomic, so you can grab it down low and be able to kind of customize your downward and your sawing force. So obviously if you're in an awkward position trying to cut a tree limb and you just can't get enough pressure, all you have to do is grab the saw in a different position and just your force is driving more on this upper bar rather than trying to push more in line with the blade, and that's inherently going to drive it down, which is also could be an advantage. And it's the type of ergonomics that a lot of saws actually don't offer. So thought that was worth mentioning. Anyway, it's the end of my review of this slide lock What-A Saw, and it is an interesting take on a folding bow saw, and just wanted to bring it to your attention. And this one happens to be made in Taiwan. It's not American made, but the quality still isn't too bad at all. And I like the idea of having a hand saw that you can put a variety of different blades in. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.